Hi, everyone.
Hi, we are back for week 3. And this week we wanted to talk about the ways in which including and being culturally competent in your educational space is in line with Jewish values and shows a mastery of Jewish values. So in the PowerPoint lesson, we talked about the values of understanding and love and social responsibility as Jewish values that are implied when we do this work of cultural competent educational spaces. But we also wanted to share a couple of other values that guide the two of us as educators when we're thinking about why we build culturally competent educational spaces. So Amelia,
Yeah.
Start.
So using the same Making Benches Jewish Camp, the value I sort of chose is netzach, which they've interpreted as perseverance or grit. So I think the reason that this guides me is that I know that my Jewish world has gotten stronger and I think can go the distance because it's more diverse, it's more culturally competent. And I know that when things come up that are tricky or difficult, that the cultural competence and the diversity and the general inclusivity of my Jewish educational kind of network, so people like Becky and other educators, is better. And so I know that the more that I can work towards cultural competence, every time I'm entering any kind of educational space, I know that I'm going to be a more effective educator. I know that I'm going to learn better from my mistakes and be able to admit them. I know that I'm going to grow and be more impactful on my students of all ages. Right now, I mostly work with teens and adults. I've taught with younger kids. And I know that we need to remember that it's hard to get through this work, but that if we persevere, if we keep that kind of strength at the center, we're going to be able to be really much more expansive in our understanding of how to help youth of all ages and learning abilities engage with each other in the Jewish content. What about you? What'd you pick?
So I wanted to think about order and like the idea of seder, right? That's where that word comes from, is order. Right. Because I think, and it's interesting, Making Menches sort of thinks of this as like organization and order. And to me, it's critical to have a flexible plan. And so I liked the way that you were talking about like perseverance and grit and recognizing you might not get it right the first go around, but like it's critical to keep doing it and to learn from the mistakes. But I also think it's really critical to like have a plan, have an order, right? And like, and the way we think about a Passover Seder is like there is a plan and a flow, and every Seder that you go to is different. Every Seder has different traditions. Every Seder has different ideas, right? But there is this like overlying structure. And to me, I think that that's really critical, this idea of like, you have a plan, you have a foundation, and you recognize that it might not go the way that you're imagining it to, and that there is space for that, and that the order is not rigid, to me is sort of central and foundational to thinking about culturally competent spaces, because you're going to learn as you go. I am certainly not claiming as an educator who tries to keep these things in mind in my spaces that I have all of the answers and that I know the best way, right? Right? It's like regularly I'm like, oh man, okay, we're going to figure it out together. But that I do plan as much as I can, and I do build it into my curriculum, and I don't just sort of assume and imagine that it'll work out well, right? That it's time consuming. Like I said in the last video, or the second week too, when I was talking about building spaces for my student that was vision impaired, it wasn't simple. It wasn't like a quick fix. And I had to be flexible about it, but I put a lot of time into it, right? Into that order that is flexible and grows and shrinks as you need it to. And that is so a part of so many Jewish moments and Jewish ideas I think is also really central to building culturally competent and culturally reflective spaces.
And I think one of the things that I'll actually go back to from my week 1 PowerPoint is that cultural competence is not an end goal. There's not like a checkbox, right? It's an ever evolving process. It's developmental. People who have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years are still making mistakes and learning. Language has evolved. The world continues to change. So people have to adapt. And so if you think of this as like we did our diversity, equity, and inclusion training, we did our cultural competency training.
We're done.
We're done. I'm sorry to tell you that you are not, and you never will be, but we can be always better, and we will always continue to kind of pursue that excellence. So I think that's sort of just what you were just saying reminded me of.
Yeah, it is. It's an ongoing process. And as I go to like conferences, I feel like I'm always having these conferences. I'm always going to conferences where we're talking about like, oh, how do we be inclusive of like LGBTQ students? How do we be inclusive of students of color? How do we be inclusive of this? And like the idea that like a session,
right?
A session at a conference will like do that for us. For me is always a good reminder of like, oh no, I always need to be reading. I always need to be talking to my students. I always need to be sort of ready to be wrong and build better for the next time. And right, it's ongoing. It's forever. It's not one session at a conference and now I know how to include whatever group you want in my programming. It's like a forever and ongoing learning process of being better each time.
And I'll say that if you are someone who works with any age of student who is younger than you, and I think, Becky, you said this in week 1, like they know. So you can ask them to help teach you. I remember I brought a guest speaker into one of my classes and we did a go around at the beginning and I asked the teens at that point to say their gender pronouns because it's just a practice that I have. And I remember afterwards she said to me, God, they don't flinch when you ask them for that. And I was like, no, they're 14 to 17. They've been doing this since they were 10. They don't care. They're not going to get all up in arms about gender pronouns. Now we're a suburb of Boston and things are a little, it's geographically different, but you'd be surprised, all the way down to the little ones. Easier for them to wrap their brain around stuff. They're not as bogged down and they don't hold as much baggage. You may, if you're teaching an adult education, have different kinds of challenges, but there's also additional wisdom in that room. So I think just always remembering that like there's going to be stuff you don't know and that your students can bring you as much knowledge as you're trying to bring them.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think that wisdom, that is another Jewish value, right? Is like seeing the wisdom in all the places that it comes. And that there's plenty of wisdom in elders and there's plenty of wisdom in age, but there's also a lot of deep wisdom in the young people that we're learning. I often say that like the young people I'm learning with and I'm learning alongside. And then right, you were right. They bring a lot and they know a lot and like leaning on that value of like wisdom and like wisdom in all the places that it comes from.
Yep. Awesome. All right, guys, we'll see you for one more video next week. Bye.